Welcome back. The new Women's Minister says the plight of rural women is a major concern for her department and has welcomed their focus at this year's session of the Commission on the Status of Women in New York. In her first board-ranging interview since South Africa's cabinet reshuffle, Bathabile Dlamini called on Treasury to ensure that gender budgeting takes place within each and every government department, while her ministry would focus on strengthening policy. She also addressed views that she'd been demoted to a new portfolio from social development, tackle concerns over the male-dominant ANC top six, and expressed her views on President Cyril Ramaphosa.
South Africa's newly installed Women's Minister Bathabile Dlamini is leading South Africa's delegation to this year's session of the Commission on the Status of Women, of course formerly of Social Development, but also currently the President of the African National Congress's Women's League. Minister, welcome back to New York. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
The focus of this year's Commission on the Status of Women is ensuring that rural women are not left behind. To what extent is that a concern that faces the South African government in terms of the context that urban women are certainly progressing, but the concern being that rural women are not progressing quite as fast?
I think it's a huge concern. But also, I think we must understand that we are trying to put the issues of women living in rural areas and girls or on the table for discussion. And also, we are trying to ensure that at all times when we do our work, more particularly in the rural areas, we must ensure that women and girls are part of that work. Because if you look into a rural girl, you will see a woman who walk long distances to school, who faces dangers of being raped or killed on her way to school, but also who comes back home tired, do a household chores, and at the same time is expected to study, do the washing for the brothers, and does not get time to integrate with the whole community. And therefore, she is shy to speak in meetings where there are men and boys. But also in terms of ownership of the land, in terms of ownership of proceeds at home, she doesn't get a thing.
Globally, I think the number is 13% of women actually own the land on which they toil. 13%. That figure is astronomically low.
And actually, in our country, women, 58% of our women who stay in the rural areas are the ones who work the land for a number of reasons.
To feed the country.
To feed the children, and that replaces the work that should be done by government, which means that women are working very hard almost every day, but that is not counted in the GDP. Even in the urban areas, the same happens. Women work very hard. They volunteer a lot, and most of the time, no one respects the work they are doing.
Do you feel, though, that, Minister, being in the cabinet, that this is a priority for South Africa's government? You know, we talk here a lot in terms of the SDGs, in terms of what we want for Goal 5, in terms of women's empowerment, that it's not happening fast enough. Now, it's one thing talking about things and making nice speeches, but are we implementing the targets?
What I've seen during the handover by Minister Susan is that there is a lot of work that is done by that ministry. And what we need to try and do as South African women, all women, and also work with gender-sensitive men, is to face the overarching challenge, which is patriarchy. Because at all times, we are at the mercy of men. So if we can fight the demon of patriarchy, we would be able to deal with a number of issues. But other things that are happening in that office, issues of policy, issues of monitoring, evaluation, as well as planning, and also gender budgeting. But what is important is that the Treasury should be part of the processes of gender budgeting. Each and every department must say that this year, this is how much we are going to use for women. And after that, there must be a monitoring and evaluation by the department in the presidency again. And each and every CFO in departments, municipalities, provinces must know that they have a gender budget.
So are we talking here about chronic underfunding for the Women's Ministry, for example, and what it's trying to implement? Is that your message to Treasury? Give us more money?
The message is the Treasury must ensure that all departments have a gender budget.
All departments?
Yes. And then ours is to try and ensure that we strengthen policy, and we have to ensure that everyone understands what gender budgeting is. Gauteng province once started gender budgeting, but at some stage I think they were discouraged, but their budget used to be up to speed, and therefore that should be revived. But also, I think at some stage we also did not believe in gender budgeting. I think we are good at learning from experience, and the experience is that in countries where there is gender budgeting, you see a progress in the quality of lives of women living in rural areas, women living in squalor, women living in poverty. And we must not allow people to sidetrack us. We must know as public representatives that we are there to represent women, and we are there to eradicate poverty, because poverty is the face of a woman.
And corruption, Minister, you mentioned this in your briefing on behalf of SADC to the Commission earlier. You talked about the African Union year of fighting corruption. To what extent does corruption play a role in impeding the progress that we seek for rural women in particular?
I think it plays a very important role. It plays a huge role, not an important role. Women do not even get development because it ends high up there. Because we know who is high up there, who is a CEO, who is a manager, who has a skill to divert a funding that is meant to empower the poor back to the rich. And who does not believe in seeing a change in the quality of lives of ordinary people, because that is how we should try and measure the performance of public representatives. It must be through seeing change at the grassroots level, and seeing what each and every one of us is doing to ensure that we redivert economy to the poor.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. In South African context, is a great segue to what we are talking about in South Africa today: land expropriation without compensation, a new mining charter, a universal access to clean water for rural women in particular. That is still not universal in South Africa. How do you, as the new Women's Minister, ensure that women are at the forefront, at the center of the outcomes that those new policies seek?
What has been happening, for instance, there was a call by the African National Congress during the period of President Zuma that 30% of each and every business should be for women. And we should be following all that. But also, why 30% when we are more than
51%? Absolutely.
And these are the areas where, as women, we should use our power.
Let's talk a bit about, the future of the women's ministry. You're the new minister here. People talk that Bathabile Dlamini was demoted from social development to women. Is this a demotion? Do you see it that way?
Firstly, I think people want to see it as a demotion because even in their own families, they undermine women. And therefore, everything that has a woman is inferior. And therefore, if you are in that ministry, you are demoted. That is not how I feel. Right now, I feel I am placed where my heart is, and that secondly, the ANC is giving me an opportunity to cool off and try and focus on my work, and that thirdly, mine is not to look at those that are saying I've been demoted. Mine is to look at women in South Africa, girls in South Africa that are still in poverty as we are speaking.
What do you mean, though, Minister, when you say time to cool off? Explain that to me.
I don't have words, but you know that in the past year, I've been going to bed maybe for 2 hours because I would try and go through reports and the literature on how to change the payment system.
Of course.
And read what is happening in various countries.
We're talking about SASA now.
Yes, I did not have a life altogether. But first week after the reshuffle, it was 11:45 hours in bed. And my daughter came to say, "Mommy, what time is it now?" And then I was already drowsy. I picked up the watch and I said 11:45. And they jumped. They said, "Oh, Mommy, after a long time, you are going to bed before 12 o'clock. We are happy about what the President and the ANC has done." That is how people that are close to me view the whole thing. And I'm also happy where I am because even at social development, I did not put myself.
Well, this is your first major interview. You travelled to New York for your first major interview since the reshuffle. Let's just look back at December and the ANC conference. 5 out of the top 6 are men. How does that strike you? Just on the face of it. Never mind the politics behind it. Forget about the politics for a second. The fact that we have 5 men and 1 woman who did not get a promotion in the top 6, what does that look like to you? Backsliding?
I think so. I think so. It means we have to work very hard for the coming elections because actually we were saying that what we need to do now is to ensure that there is a zebra, a man, a woman, a man, a woman, in all the elective
that's
structures.
That's ANC policy.
Yes.
Parity at all structures, provincial, local and national government.
But parity might mean 12 men on top and 12 women at the end. So if you have the zebra, you have a woman and a man, a woman and a man, or a man and a woman. But one other thing, we need to work very hard and ensure that women believe in themselves. We need to ensure that in branches, regions, and provinces, we have women as chairpersons, not as president only. And
so it's a bottom-up approach.
Yes, bottom-up approach. But one other thing that is important is that women must not hate themselves. They must love themselves. And they must be resilient enough to stand defeat and not start with the blaming game and not behave as if as women we are all the same. We are homogeneous. We are not homogeneous as women. We know who believes in what. And therefore, we should be given a latitude to support those that believe in us. But also, there is one other thing that women usually do. The media, for instance, they kept on asking the question, okay, you are the Women's League, do you support so and so? Do you support so and so? Do you support so and so? And they don't ask the very same question to themselves. Because if we talk about women, we talk about women in all spheres of life. If as women we want to be led by women, we must all be involved in the program for women's emancipation and gender equality. It should not be pushed squarely, and women must not be used to ask questions for men. Because
don't
they
worry,
don't
I will
ask
ask my
their questions.
I will ask my own questions.
That's fine, that's fine.
Minister, final question. You did back the losing team. You are now in the cabinet of the winning, who was your opposition. You said some interesting things. I mean, that was all part of the political campaign. What's your view on President Cyril Ramaphosa and his new cabinet and the way forward? Final question.
Firstly, I think he has tried his best to ensure that some of us are there, even if there was a strong campaign against, for instance, Nomvula and myself. And people forgot about things, the worst things that were done by others. Our sin was to campaign for a woman candidate. And then other things were left out. The week running to the reshuffle, the campaign escalated, and nothing was able to block the president from taking his decisions.
Democracy in action.
And so I think whatever we want to say, he has proved that he has 2 ears. Babkwala taught me that a leader must have 2 ears, because if you are a leader and you have 1 ear, you will end up destroying the whole organization. And secondly, I think we all need to be given a chance, and he must be given a chance. There is a long road ahead of us. As time is moving, South Africans understand elections, and they know what they want, and which means that we must also upscale our campaign and ensure that we win the minds and heart of our people. Our people are not going to be like in 1994, where Madiba went out and campaigned throughout the country, and we knew we were going to win elections. They ask questions: why, what, and when. And these are the things we must be able to respond to. And we must unite the ANC in action.
We certainly do have a more engaged electorate, which is a good thing, I think, for democracy. Minister, good to see you. Thank you for speaking with us. South Africa's Women's Minister, the President of the African National Congress Women's League, speaking to us here exclusively on the sidelines of the Commission of the Status of Women in New York.